Welcome to Dadhammer, Bolters and Booze, where we discuss all things Warhammer while staying hydrated with an adult beverage. I am David the Warboss, and I am joined by the most generic Space Marine in the Imperium, Mr. Medicae Steve. Steve, how are we doing tonight?
We're doing good. Out of breath, catching up.
Been out of breath. Yeah. Out of breath from just jumping on the podcast. Man,
there was a A to B category that took a lot out of me before I got there, but
you sprinted. Going
strong now, man. Going strong.
Good. Well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm enjoying the lull, I guess. It doesn't really seem like a lull, but the lull after the 40K Leviathan launch, I feel like it's like an after Christmas wave. You know, You're like, what do I do now?
wait for spring.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, happy to be doing another podcast. We have a great show for you. We're going to talk about the Leviathan launch recap, party, everything leading up to it, our experience with it. And then we also got to play a big game at my house, the compound, the Dadhammer compound, I think as you called it. And we had several people over. We got to play a launch game with 10th edition rules, and it was great. So we'll talk about that in our experience with a couple of games that we played, and then some lessons learned if you're thinking about getting into a 10th edition game and you haven't had a chance to do it yet. We have lots of observations, lots of things that we probably could have done better, and or swayed the game in our favor. So thank you so much for listening to our show. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to rate, follow, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And of course, you can find us on our website, dadhammerpodcast.com, and on all the social media platforms where we post pictures of our latest projects and comment on various things within the Warhammer community. But first, before we get going on anything else, we're going to start with the most important part of every Dadhammer podcast, and that is, what are we drinking? And Steve, I'll go first tonight.
All right. Sounds good.
Mine's pretty boring. I'll just say that. And this is not to disparage the product that I am drinking tonight. It's just it's not as exciting as some of our other recipes. I am drinking a local beer. It's Music City Light, and emphasis on the light. I'm usually an IPA, a hazy IPA, a dark beer, stouts. I drink that kind of stuff. And I generally don't go for the light beer. I haven't had one in a while. This one's pretty good. It's just your standard fare, but I'm supporting our local Nashville breweries. And this one says, "Our town, our beer." So, it gives me a sense of, it's not patriotism. Is it patriotism if it's for the city?
It's community. It's community.
Community? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. It is very light. Just looking through my glass here, I think I can see my computer screen through this beer, but still enjoyable. It's a good summer drink. Highly recommend it if you want something on the lighter side. Now, Steve, I'm going to pass over to you because yours is the complete opposite.
Yeah, it might be a bit much, but so we're kind of continuing our little Tyranid adventure because I don't guess I realized just how all of us were actually pretty excited about the Tyranid half of the box. So maybe we didn't want to admit it, but I'm getting the sense like, Tyranids are kind of cool.
They are.
And everyone else is like, Tyranids kind of cool. And I think we're just all excited about painting that half of the box. So just continuing with the Tyranid theme, I decided to call this one the Shadow in the Warp after its army's main, one of the main rules for the army. It's just a variation of an Irish car bomb, which I guess is probably not real PC these days, but but everybody's heard of it.
But that's the name of the drink.
It's the name of the drink. I didn't make it. It is what it is. But I made my own little variation of it. So it's an ounce of Kraken Dark Spiced Rum. See what I did there? Kraken.
Very nice.
High Fleet. Yeah. An ounce of Irish cream, and a bottle of Guinness extra stout. The traditional car bomb. Yeah. The traditional drink is you put the Irish cream and I guess it's Irish whiskey into a shot glass and drop it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't really go for that. So I just kind of mixed them up all together and and drank it on ice. And I'm gonna say had a little trepidation. I thought, oh, that's gonna be heavy for June to July. That's a hearty drink, but man, it's really good.
Yeah. Well, you're
It's like
inside. You're in air conditioned
this is true.
environment. If you're
Yeah,
drinking this outside and in the middle of the afternoon,
you
I might
crazy.
I might question, but also tip my hat, at the same time. But if you're drinking late at night, right now it's in the
hmm
70s. It's okay.
It's very much like chocolate milk.
Mm.
Um, I'm gonna do that again. No lie. I highly recommend it. And maybe it's the mix of, in all fairness, I use, it's called Whisper Cream. It's
Mhm.
actually a bourbon type cream liqueur.
Yeah.
So it's just instead of an Irish whiskey, like, I'm losing it right now. Irish cream. That's the word.
Yeah.
It's very similar in taste, just maybe a little bit sweeter. Um, but
Well, I
same
really like
principle.
the cream liqueur
Mm-hmm.
based drinks. They feel like a dessert. A lot of
It,
times, where we go to a restaurant and they'll have after dinner drinks, dessert
mm-hmm.
drinks, and a lot of times I'll drink that stuff and I'll feel like, man, you know what this could use is a scoop of ice cream or something.
This could use it like a float.
It's very close. It's very
Yeah,
sweet, and man, Shadow in the Warp. I like it.
yeah, it's
I
very
will have to try
tasty.
one.
Pretty proud of myself on
Yeah, mine is definitely not that adventurous.
it.
Mine's not a Shadow in the Warp. Mine's just maybe on the outskirts of the warp in a well lit and clean freighter.
There
That's
you go.
mine doesn't even anywhere close to the warp. Mine just fresh off, just took a shower and feeling really good, and really hopeful about the galaxy. That's where my drink is.
But there's much room needed for that.
Well, enjoy, Steve. Cheers and bottoms up.
Cheers.
All right, let's get into some Leviathan launch day shenanigans. I'll say. I don't know if they were shenanigans. We had a good time.
Yeah, we did.
Um, Everything leading up to it, of course, it's been great for us when we're recording stuff about the podcast. Just all the leaks and the rules leaks and the index material coming out and all of the drips of news from the Warhammer community site coming out every single morning. And they did a really fantastic job of just bashing you over the head with news every single day of the week. It was awesome, and I felt that they delivered on the hype of the box, and they had plenty to go around for everybody. I didn't see any complaints around, but I thought what was cool is when for me, I really felt part of the product launch. I felt like I was a part of something that almost like when the new iPhone comes out and there's a line backed out
Yeah.
the door. We had all of that kind of hype minus the camping out, and we only had to wait like 30 seconds to get our box,
That's
which
right.
was nice. But it was cool where we all got together. We all went to our local game store, Blackthorn, and we picked up the box and looked around like we were going to buy some more stuff. I mean, we ended up buying paint, but it's just kind of cool to be a part of that, and we all walk out of there fully grown adults with
Just
with our
yeah.
with our little presents, our
Oh
toys from the
man,
toy store.
that's right. I remember the days of uh the first Super Nintendo, or
Yeah,
actually not even Nintendo, just our Super Nintendo, the original Nintendo.
yeah, the
And
NES. Hmm.
yeah, the NES, and it felt the same kind of way. Your friends, y'all talked about it. You knew the game was coming out. Everyone saved their money because they didn't pump out games like they do now.
Yeah.
Um, and you just kind of you got to the store, like, well, for me it was Sears. That was the store.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, right. So yeah, dating myself a little, but that's how it felt. It's like, man, I'm going to get Punch Out, or I'm going to go get we're getting Metroid, and all your friends are like, "Did you get Metroid?" Yes, I got
It
Metroid.
did, man. Like this is maybe that's part of the appeal of all this
Mm-hmm.
and why I felt like a little child because we walked out of the store with our boxes in hand,
Mm-hmm.
and we're like, all right, we did it. Like I felt like, man, I just picked up the new Ninja Turtles.
Yeah,
That's
man.
what. But
And
I'm an adult. It was such a weird feeling.
and despite all the swagger we threw out there at the first, like, oh, if I get it, I get it. If I don't, that's okay. I don't really need it. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie, man. There was a little stretch. I was like, well, how am I
What
gonna feel if I don't get it?
what if I don't get it?
I'll be a little sad.
Yeah, but I didn't. There had plenty of
Yeah,
boxes, which was
yeah.
great, and I'm also, I would say, happy slash a little disappointed. Not really. I mean, about
Mm-hmm.
the pre-order bonuses that were much hyped. Um, Free is free, so I'm not
Yeah.
trying to say that I didn't like it or whatever. But we got the pre-order bonuses that weren't the tokens in the nice little tin or anything. The ones that we were able to choose from were the dice tray with the big, like,
Mm-hmm.
was it a uh,
It's a
it wasn't the
Terminator.
Tyranid eyeball. What was it?
It's the
Terminator.
Terminator face. Yeah.
Yeah, it had the Terminator eye on the dice tray, and then the other option were the deployment markers, the
Mm-hmm.
guardrail things that you could put around it. So, we amongst our group, I actually got to pick from one or the other and look at them. I'm gonna say that those between those two, they were kind of meh.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the dice tray was more like a mouse pad. So, I mean, legit, it was a mouse
It-
pad with
yeah,
with the
a thin
clasps,
mouse pad.
a very thin, very small mouse pad with the little buttons at the corners where
Mm-hmm.
you could snap it together. And I mean, I guess it works in a pinch, but you're better off going and getting like an official one, maybe on Amazon. That's like that faux leather. It's just much sturdier. So
And bigger.
I agreed, and I don't think anybody's gonna cry over or losing it.
Nah.
But it was a nice to have, and the little deployment things are cool, I guess. But I don't think I'll ever use them. So, Steve, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, pretty much. I when I saw the dice tray, I was like, I don't need that.
Yeah.
It'd be cool, but I'm not going to use it for what it's intended for. I saw the deployment markers, and while it's a little, it did kind of come in handy on our game because we had a weird shaped deployment zone.
Oh, you actually
So
used them?
yeah, I set them out
Oh, I
because
didn't even use mine because I'm an idiot.
well, ours were it was we had a diagonal deployment zone,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it gave a decent frame of reference where you could eye shot from one. I didn't run it all the way across, but I was like, I could
Well, that's cool.
maybe
I
find a
mean,
use for it.
and I'm looking at them right now. I've got them in my hand, and
Mhm.
I do like the fact that on one side it's got like the bones, the
Mhm.
Tyranid, maybe even chaosy looking side, and then on the other side it's more of an industrial. And then on the other ones, I guess it's kind of Space Marine Dark Angel looking with the green,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then again industrial on the other side. So I like that they, if you're going to get something free, at least make it useful, which I think they
That's
did a
right.
good job of. So, no
Yeah.
complaints. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I'll say too that after I got my box, of course, I didn't open it until I think the following day. Well, I'll take that back. I opened it up and I got the rules out.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Um, but once I had it in hand, opened it up. Of course, we were playing that same day. I picked those up in the morning, and so I've got the rules out, all that stuff. And I did open it to get that. I didn't really look through the models and everything. But what I while I was waiting for everybody to come over to start our big, our party, I guess, the 10th
Mhm.
edition games that we were going to play, I had a couple of hours and I caught the Twitch stream from Games Workshop where they were doing a hangout and hobby. And
Okay.
they had the normal hosts, Emma and I think Lizzie, I think is her name,
I
or
think
the
that's
ones that
right.
do the painting classes, and then they had Nick and Simon. Um, they're doing some of the battle reports. They had
Mhm.
Alex doing lore masters. And what was cool is I just put it up on my computer while I was getting things ready, and I had it up on the TV while we were playing. So
Okay.
it felt like the old hangout and hobby days. They used to do
Oh
those a few
yeah.
months ago. So that was pretty cool. But just overall, in general, I felt like the entire day, even if we didn't get to play a game, which we're going to talk about here in a second, e- even if we hadn't gotten to play, I still felt like a big event, which was cool.
There's a lot of redemption to the hobby. Not
Yeah.
maybe redemption's not the word, but I don't know. I felt like a lot of those like frustrated feelings and just sort of bad vibes that were pumping out there at the end of ninth and through parts of it. I felt like that was just a nice cathartic day. That you felt like you were doing it, but you knew other people were doing something very similar to what you were doing. And they were all hanging out with their friends
Yeah.
and they were all having a good time. And it was just this almost global nerd day that only 0.1% of the population knew about.
The most important 0.1%. At least, and I bet I just think that if, regardless, even if you're not into Warhammer, people that are listening to this are into Warhammer, of course, but even if you have your significant other is into a completely different hobby, it's just cool to experience something like this with a large community,
Mm-hmm.
and they're hyped for the same thing that you're hyped about, even though it may be a minor thing.
Yeah.
And that's the appeal of sports. That's the appeal of, I'm a big sports fan. When you get together with others and you're high-fiving and all that, it's the same type of vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and you get excited. So overall, really successful launch day, and I had a ton of fun.
Me too.
Well, we did get to play a couple of games. We were hoping to play more, but after we got our boxes and everything, and people came over to my house, we had, I think in total, we have 6 or 7 people over.
Six people.
Yeah, and we got to
6 people.
do a split. I have a ping pong table and then battle mats and everything, and I worked it out where you could do 2 battle mats overlapping. So essentially, I had a half and half situation where
Mm-hmm.
you had one group playing on half the ping pong table and the other half playing, and it had different terrain and stuff. Worked out pretty well. And I just wanted to kind of just spend a couple of minutes talking about my experience with it. Number one, I was trying to concentrate and focus on playing the game. And then about halfway through, it's like I'm still hosting a party. So
Yes.
the host of me is thinking, okay, got to make sure everybody is entertained. Does everybody have what they need? Do they know where the food is? Do they need
Mm-hmm.
coffee? Do they need, okay, beers over there? And just being a party host got in
Mm-hmm.
the way of my game a little bit, and I zoned out for a few minutes. And so just as an FYI, if you're ever going to host one of these kinds of things, if you're going to do a launch day party or you're going to have several people over, make sure you've prepped for that, and so that everybody's settled before you really start focusing on a game. Or I mean, maybe you can do it and I'm just limited in my mental capacity, but
No, we had people we hadn't met. There was people there
that's
that
true.
some of us hadn't met each other too. So that throws a little bit like you got to get that social little meeting out of the way and everybody get kind of comfortable talking to each other and all that stuff. So, but it's a factor,
I mean, I thought it worked great.
Mm-hmm.
There was what I really liked about it too is because we're all there in the same room and we're still learning. We're all learning 10th edition together.
Right.
We're asking each other questions, and we'd be playing, and I'd say, "Hey, I got a question, a rules clarification." And if
Mm-hmm.
essentially you've got 4 rules lawyers in the room that, well, I would say rules lawyers in a negative sense, meaning people that are going to give you their honest take on it from what they've read or something.
Right.
And it was great just to be able to ask. So it's almost like being in a game store. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a really cool experience for me. I don't know, Stevie, you had to, you were providing me answers, you were asking questions. I just thought it was a good back and forth.
Yeah, and I think everybody had some, a little experience under their belt, so we weren't teaching each other the game from the ground up.
Right.
We were able to really get into it a little bit, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I liked, of course, the friendly banter. And what I started saying, because we had one of our friends across the table asking questions, and he's a really good player, and I just like to give him a hard time all the time. But he kept asking questions, and I was kidding, but I was
Yeah.
getting frustrated at him constantly interrupting and asking good questions that I didn't know the answer to.
Right.
And anytime I didn't know the answer, I would just say, "Hey, this line right here is obscuring. This is obscuring terrain. You can't see over here, unless I ask you a question, and then it comes down."
Yeah, the DM was coming out, wasn't it?
That's 100%. But I had a great time, and I think we all had a great time. The only, I would say, a couple of tips for anybody again thinking about hosting something like this is make sure you got everything printed out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is just like if you're hosting a D&D campaign. It's the same rules apply. If you assume that your players aren't going to bring everything that they need, so it's
Fair
good to
enough.
have all of the indexes available to print, and make sure you've got enough toner or ink cartridges or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And then maybe even, and I debated on doing this when we were playing, but setting a timer, because
Yeah.
we were only able to get one game in after all of the talk and getting
Mm-hmm.
food and back and forth. And we probably could have played two games, but then if I'd put the timer on it, it, maybe I would have felt rushed the whole time and we wouldn't have as good of a time. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Especially for intro, that this is the first time any of us have played the rules really. So
Yeah, and some of us playing new armies for the first time, right?
that's
So
that's true too.
there was a lot of a lot of getting used to it, talking to new people. So if you're going to host one of these things, I highly recommend it. It was awesome. Just think about this stuff to limit the
Mm-hmm.
amount of. It's not really wasted time, but it's just extra time that adds on. If you think if
Yeah.
you got a hard stop, for example, to be done with the games by a certain amount of time because you got plans later. Just be
Right.
mindful of all that. It's going to take a good hour or two longer than you think it will because of so many
Always.
people. Yeah. Well, now let's get into the actual games. So we got to
Mm-hmm.
play two games. Steve, you played against our friend Lawson, and you were Dark Angels and
That's
Thousand
right.
Suns. And then I played Orks, and I played against our friend Lee, who was running Tau.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with you.
Okay.
And I was occasionally glancing over and like looking beyond the obscuring terrain, lowering the veil and just catching little bits here and there, but it was hard to see a full battle report, if you will, because I was
Sure.
so engaged in mine or getting other people coffee.
Mhm.
so
Yeah, that was a big deal.
so what were your main takeaways? How did it go? What'd you think?
So I think it went very well. Lawson is a really stinking good player. Um, he knows his army in and out, which I thought I knew mine pretty well, but no, I got a little ways to go. He played Thousand Sons, and that army is no joke. I know we picked on him with the circus magician, and I know he was very concerned about the whole psychic phase because that was their whole gig, right?
Yeah.
It just placed. It felt like I don't know that army's rules, so but I can tell you from experience being on the opposite side of it, it just placed all that psychic stuff in a different spot.
Mm-hmm.
It was just as deadly. I thought I was doing great. So I started off turn one. My list real quick. I had 5 Deathwing Terminators. They were all set up for melee with lightning claws and thunderhammers and storm shields. I had a 5-man unit of infiltrators with lieutenant and phobos armor. I had Azrael, and he was attached to a 5-man squad of hellblasters, and they were packed in a land raider. And then I had 3 eliminators. So, and it's for right at 1,000 points.
So yeah, we played 1,000 point games
Mm-hmm.
just to try to keep them, hopefully, with the idea of playing two games. But yeah, I mean, pretty solid list. Of course, you
Mm.
didn't know what you were going up against with Thousand Suns.
No idea. So I came out of the gate. I rolled to where I got to go first. Which Lawson was like, oh, well, this is it for me. He thought for sure that he was just doomed because he didn't get to go first. And I made a good show. I was able to, I can use my infiltrators, and it's not deep strike, but it's a very, very healthy forward deployment. So I was able to put them and their lieutenant directly on an objective in no man's land. I was able to take my eliminators and put them up on top of a structure outside of my deployment zone, so they had a nice wide field of view and big shooting lanes. And then my first move, I just moved my Land Raider up and unpacked the can and put those guys kind of in a good shooting spot, and then plugged a hole with the Land Raider. So, it was sort of tied up some extra terrain basically. And then because the Terminators have a deep strike, I was able to, at the end of my movement phase, teleport them in, deep strike them in, and I put them directly on an objective. So at the end of my movement phase, I had 3 objectives tied up, which I was like, sweet.
Yeah, feeling pretty good at that point.
Feeling very good about it. My shooting phase did pretty good. I didn't do as much damage with the Land Raiders I hoped. I didn't have the best rolls. My Terminators couldn't do anything because they're melee. The Hellblasters, that plasma is very sweet. Needs 10 people. I'll get to that in a little bit. And my Infiltrators are okay. They just had some bolt, rifles, and they did pretty good. And the Eliminators, I had to say, pretty disappointed in them. That was, 3 guys, 3 shots. It's pretty easy to kind of muff that, even with all the re-rolls and stuff like that. It's just, I didn't feel like, woohoo.
Are they best geared? I mean, I love playing the Eliminators. They're one of my favorites, just because they're, I don't know, they're just the whole sniper thing is, to me, is always a really cool deal. But I mean, are they a good choice for Dark? I mean, I run them as Space Wolves. And Space Wolves are primarily melee.
Yeah.
So the Eliminators, anybody range shooting, it's not going to be great unless you're playing the Long Fangs, which are the Space Wolves kind of
That's right.
snipers, I guess. But I just like playing them, But it seems like to me that they nerfed them a little bit. They're not as deadly as they used to be on their own, and you really don't get the benefit playing them in a faction, or a chapter rather, that's not designed for it.
No, I would have been much better off throwing like 3 bikes, or even one attack bike with a multi-melt on it or something. I think I would have gotten a lot more juice for the squeeze, for those guys.
But but that said, do you feel like that? I felt like in ninth, you could still, the bulk of your army, and again, we don't play competitive, but the bulk of your army, my army, was always, let's say, 1,500 points. We're going to be serious. That's like, all right, this is the core of my group, and then I'm going to take, I would say most competitive players, they don't really take much fluff or extra stuff at the end, but they might take, if they're doing semi-competitive, they might have an extra 150 points left over to take something they don't necessarily care about. I like to leave a good 500 points, and I was in 9th edition. And as long as I took something that wasn't too expensive, that could still do a little damage every now and then, I felt good about it. And I took Eliminators when I played Space Wolves. Do you feel like that they're in that camp of, even though they look really awesome, and your camo cloaks, and we talked about this before, your camo cloaks on those Eliminators are a baller. So
appreciate it.
Do you feel like, though, that it's worth taking not just an Eliminator, but a unit that doesn't receive all the buffs and benefits, or is that more of a 9th edition thing?
Well, if we were playing more points, if I had a little more room to spare, it would have been a really good unit. And I'll say that because my Land Raider was every bit of a quarter of my points for this game. So it's like 275 points. So it ate up a pretty big slot as far as my points go. The Eliminators aren't that necessarily high in points, but now you're dipping into like just really slimming out your list because you just don't have as much to work with. That being said, that rule to where they could really hit, ignore the lookout sir or whatever, they could snipe a character that's attached
the
to
precision.
Yeah, that's it. That's the precision. I think that's still viable. I just didn't get the opportunity to do it like I wanted to. I'm still determined to make that Land Raider work. Lawson. So I looked at his army across the way, and just so we can get to yours here shortly. But so I think he had a 10-man squad of Terminators, which he was holding back to deep strike in his turn. And the rest of them, I think it was a 10-man squad of guys with flamers. I don't know his units very well. And then he had a couple of, I think he had a named sorcerer and another sorcerer.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I could see that being 1,000 points in an elite army, but that sure doesn't look like a lot of models on the board. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts his turn, and immediately I feel the heat, and no pun intended. Flamers are no joke in this game. And backed up with, he gets to back his stuff up with ensorcelled weapons and amazing rerolls and stuff from the psychic aspect of his army. Gets to translate a lot of things to devastating wounds or lethal hits, or
a lot of combo opportunities.
Lots of combo, and he's a good player, so he knows how to get every bit out of it. And so what I learned was 10-man units, I think, are prime in this game. This is just my experience though, because he was putting out so much volume of fire because he had 10-man unit, and they all 10 would get those buffs. So I had a bunch of 5-mans, and I could still get rerolls and buffs, but you're still only talking about 5 models worth of volume of fire. So, but having 10 flamers with all the, which is their automatic hits, and then you get re-rolls and you get some other stuff on top of it.
Yeah, you're stacking the odds, right?
I mean, crushed
at that point. And I think the flame weapons, just flamers in general, are really strong, and you can combine that with the Overwatch stratagem to automatically hit. And you could do that in 9th, but it just feels even more powerful, especially with the stratagem now for Overwatch, where you can do it within 24 inches. And I was talking with Lawson afterwards, and he said he thought it was only within 9 inches. So, I mean, it could have been worse. If you go look at the stratagem, it's within 24 inches you can fire Overwatch. And then if you do that, of course, with flamers, they've got the limited range, but still, the notion is there. And then I did see during part of the game where he had his Exalted Sorcerer putting the blinding tendrils psychic ability, which completely nuked the movement of your Terminators, which are melee based. So
couldn't do anything.
They could, so even which means it reduces your movement to like 2 inches, and then if you advance, the best you can hope for would be 3. So the blinding tendrils ability cuts all that in half. So if you have a normal 5-inch, you're going to go down to 3, I guess. Or do you round down, or 2 or 3?
I think we decided we rounded down.
Yeah. And then you've got your advance and charge, and even with all the buffs that you could potentially place in strats, you're still doing a max of 10 inches of total movement all together. And that's if you roll, amazingly well. So it's just, for all intents and purposes, it just says, okay, well, now you can't reach me anymore. And he does that on a 2+, which, so ridiculous. Essentially every single time you're going to do it, which is great. So I'm curious to know, after all of that, as to your experience playing Thousand Sons, is it, and especially with the Exalted Sorcerer, because he's just going to pick one unit each time that he doesn't want to charge in. So that could be a big character, I guess. Well, he wouldn't be able to do psychic that without precision, but that would be a unit, a very strong melee heavy unit. And I'm thinking, playing against Orks, for me, what would be better potentially to not have a 10-man unit. You said that, but for like an Orks player, I don't want a big blob of 30 Ork boys, because he could just nuke the movement on them right away and cut it in half. And those guys have no defense whatsoever.
That's true. Maybe keep those 10-man units to shooting units. I guess it should
Yeah. Well,
So,
orc shooting is not the best.
well, I mean, to compound the problem, he dropped those 10 Scarab Terminators in my
Yep.
backfield,
Yep.
right behind my Land Raider, and and there was a point because of all the magnification of just firepower that his psychic stuff put on there. He was rolling 32 hits from Terminators, from combi bolters. Pretty reasonable, not a slouchy weapon, but he could roll. I forget what he had. He would roll dice and determine how many hits, and I
Yeah.
think twice he got me with 32. And
I remember looking over at him and making the comment that I don't like how you're counting those dice.
Yes. Well,
Just because I've been there. I played against him where he comes up with all these extra hits and everything. And it's like, you're sitting there and you just have to take it. But, it's all in good fun.
That's
I
right.
think a very highly competitive game. And Lawson ended up taking the victory there.
Whew,
I think, I don't know
handily.
how many rounds did you make it?
Well, let's call it. We got to 4, so
So
we
probably
kind
more
of.
like 3.
Yeah, it was really 3, and he let me do some little gentlemanly, standoff there in the fourth. He was like,
Yeah, I
"Oh,
remember
forget
that.
it. Let's just run those Terminators." He's like, "I want to see what your Terminators can do." And I
Yeah.
will say that I took out 10 of his, or 3 of his Scarab Terminators, and ended up only losing 2 of mine. So I had 5, he had 10, kill at 3, and he came back and killed 2. So
Hmm.
wasn't too shabby. It was fun.
Well, I think that was the main thing is
Mm-hmm.
both of you had a really good time. The last thing I'll say is that the terrain set up on your side of the map was more of a wasteland with the rocks, and
Yeah,
it had the
that's right.
orc terrain, which is not a lot of height. That wasn't intentional. It's just the way it was laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you're putting your eliminators down. You're not going to get that new ability where it what is that
The the plunging fire.
yeah, plunging fire. Thank you. With you get the extra AP for being higher. You're really not going to get that on a wasteland type terrain unless I had some
Right.
really tall stuff
I
out
mean,
there. But
I was able to use it, but like I said,
yeah,
they just didn't really work out in my favor. I had to
sure.
hit them first, and I was rolling bad.
Yeah. Well, sounds like both of you had a really good time, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested to see maybe round 2 at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, the second game that played on our launch day here was myself as an orc player against our friend Lee and his Tau Empire, and just truth be told, I didn't put a ton of planning into my.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an excuse, just to
Oh
kind of put
no.
it out there. I didn't put a ton of planning because I had played orcs so many times in ninth edition, and I rolled them as a ninth edition squad. I looked at the rules. I was aware of them. I knew about some of the things that I wanted to take, but I still wanted to run them just like I normally would and see what happens. This is kind of a trial game anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and first of all, I thought I deployed okay. I came out with I did run Gazgul, so I had Gazgul Thraka, but I didn't have any. I don't have any Mega Knobs because I I don't like the
Okay.
models. The models looks kind of derpy. They're old. They need a redo, I think. So I just don't own any of those. And Gazgul is only able to lead the Mega Knobs, which are like armored orcs essentially,
Oh,
orcs
okay.
in like mech suits. And so I ran him solo. More on that mistake in a second. Um, but I ran Gaz. I had 20 orc boys in a unit with a Warboss attached to it, of course, and an extra 10 blob of boys, and I put those in a Morkanaut. So I did run a Morkanaut, and I had a um, Boomdacus Snazwagon for the only because I like saying Boomdacus Snazwagon. So
Say it again.
yeah, exactly. And is there a lot of synergy? Are there synergies with this list? Not really. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew that going into it, but it's 1,000 points. And I thought, well, I know I need the core of Orc Boys. I'm going to do that. Gazgul was really deadly in ninth. So I liked getting him, and I was playing against Tau, which are ranged. So if I can get Gas into melee, he'll just destroy. And I was going to do the same thing I always do. And the Morkanaut was going to march up the field, soak up wounds, and I would eventually land on objectives. That was the plan. So I deployed okay. I got out on the objectives. Everything was going well. And then he started shooting. And I realized a fatal error that ended up, all of the firepower was focused on the Morkanaut, and the Morkanaut was expensive. I just like the model. I think the model looks cool.
It looked really good. I liked it
It's
a lot.
it's so orky. I wish the Stompa would look somewhere close to that, just bigger. But the Morkanaut doesn't look stupid. It just looks orky, and in all the right ways.
The teeth
So,
it's
yeah,
so cool.
yeah. And I like the model, and it can transport. So I thought, great, I'm going to march this thing up the field. It's got pretty high stats, and it did well. But turn one, Lee went and just pounded it. I mean, I think it took 16 wounds. The only reason it didn't blow up turn one is just because of some some bad rolls on his part. But because it's a towering unit, and he also ran Storm Surge, which is another towering unit, and there's not a lot of cover for towering units against towering units, and his towering unit was better than my towering unit, so it wasn't a good mix. In hindsight, I don't regret putting out a Morkanaut, but at the same time, probably not the best idea unless I had a better plan, and I didn't really have one.
Or a bigger army.
Yeah, for sure. It did its job to soak up damage, and I did end up winning the game, which was good. But basically because Lee had a really bad turn 2 and turn 3 in terms of shooting, and I was rolling high saves with all my 5s and 6s. I got very fortunate, but I'll say that Gazgul Thraka got into melee against the Storm Surge. I did some really good movement. I was able to fend off shots and get into and I called the Wog. So I got in melee with Storm Surge, with Gazgul, with full health. And I thought, all right, now we're going to do something, and it's going to be great. I got to say, Gazgul is not as amazing as he was in ninth. At least I don't think so. I mean,
even against Tau?
Yeah, but I was also playing, I was going against a towering unit, so there was some decent saves.
That's fair.
But 6 attacks, 2+. His strength was high, AP 3 and damage 4. It was good. I didn't roll that well, so it was like, I think the Storm Surge, it's up at like 20 wounds or something like that, and I think I did maybe 5 or 6 in my fight phase with Gazgul, and I thought, oh geez. Well, then came the next his shooting phase, and that I think that was in turn 3, and now because big guns never tire, he took his pulse blast cannon, which is a weapon that only has 2 shots and it hits on 4+, but if you use some buffs, you can get it to 3+. And he rolled to hit both of them, and it does 12 damage per shot.
Per shot?
Per shot.
That's
so
diabolical.
Gas has only got 10 wounds. Makari with him has got a 2-up invuln save, which I saved one of it, but it doesn't matter if he's dead. So
that's right.
It basically just took his massive cannon that he had and just disintegrated Gazgul. It was rough, but I ended up winning on just victory points because of how I had positioned my Orc boys on the objectives to prevent him from charging in. Objective control actually became a pretty big deal. I did have to roll Battle Shock a couple of times, and I did have Battle Shock on. I think I failed it on my. I also had a unit of Death Coptas. I had some Death Coptas, which ended up helping me later on. But I did have to roll Battle Shock on the Death Coptas. But in general, it was a great game. Lee was the tower definitely deadly. They're just not as
sounded like it.
potent, defensively as probably they could be or should be. But great game, really enjoyed it. It's just, my takeaway, Gazgul's not as great as he was, and make sure you attach him to a unit because he's just
Yeah.
out there just taking it. Makari's 2-up invul and save is nice, but you're eventually going to roll a 1.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Well, yeah, I'll get into that too in a little bit.
Yeah, but in general, great game. Really enjoyed it. I've got lots of takeaways for to be a little more careful with my deployment and my choice of orc boys in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's wrap up then. 2 great games for this segment, but let's wrap up just with some general lessons learned and observations. Steve, what was not necessarily about the individual game that you played, but just observation in general, maybe some lessons for our audience to take home with the 10th edition.
I feel like when you're putting your list together, those keywords for the weapons keywords, lethal hits, anti whatever, whether it's anti infantry, anti vehicle, are devastating. Man, those are prized. Anything you can do to translate things directly to mortal wounds, any combo you can put together, that is just devastating. Especially if you get rerolls on these things and all that stuff. So those keywords, I really kind of overlooked those keywords a little bit when I was putting my army together. I thought, well, I'll just get to it when I get to it, No, I think it's very important in your strategy when you put stuff together. I don't know. Did they help you out any, or did you see it that way, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me though, it's hard because I've still got 9th edition on the brain, and going back to trying to host a party and to play 2 games.
That's true. That's true.
And my brain can only hold so much, and so I the one of the tips that I mentioned earlier about printing off the index that and having that ready. Having the quick start guide they make available on the Warcom site was really helpful because it tells you it's a cheat sheet. It tells you what are lethal hits again, what are devastating wounds, what's a precision, and it all has that on that cheat sheet, which was really nice to have in a pinch. But I think that I don't necessarily have any regrets about something I would do differently because for me, we were getting there just to play. We were going to have a good time. And if you go into a tournament, obviously just like you're preparing for anything, do some real research and do some math, I guess, to ensure that you're not leaving anything behind. But if you're just getting together with some friends, there's nothing wrong with, Gazgul is a cool model. I like putting him out there. He looks awesome. And if his stats are not great, that's fine. I just think it was fun to do, but definitely read up on your abilities. But the whole thing about synergies, to me, that just comes with time. That'll just come after playing. You got to get reps in. You got to play multiple games. Otherwise, it's just you can only go so far with that.
And I don't know if it's because we've played a lot of games now, but I will say that for me personally, a lot of stuff was kicking. I mean, I was really on top of things. Everything felt more user friendly.
Yeah.
And some of it's just basic game mechanics and stuff, but I felt like I was just running my part of the game far smoother than I ever have. And it was just a lot. It was just a big confidence booster, and I really do kind of think it's the addition. It's the way the sheets are set out. It's that quick start guide. It's all this stuff. I never opened a book unless I was just kind of flipping through stuff. And I was flipping through the rule book when Lawson was making his movements and stuff. But the fun thing about this edition is even when your opponent is moving, you have to pay attention because you get to do things in their movement phase now.
For sure. And
so
I use the app. I used the app a couple of times.
Me too.
To look up rules, and it didn't have everything. But it did was it was nice to be able to look at the app and search for a core rule and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Um, but the one thing I'll say about if you're going to play a 10th edition game or maybe your first one, it's a kind of a risk reward. Don't run your army like a previous edition and expect
No.
and be surprised when because I did that. I knew I was
Yeah.
going in thinking, okay, I'm going to put out Gazgul. I'm just going to do his thing and hope for
Mm-hmm.
the best. And then when I got halfway through, you
Mm.
know, um, that's different, and he's going to get annihilated. And you got to be ready for that kind of stuff to roll with the punches. But
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that one of the big takeaways from our games, and especially from mine, I think the epic heroes, the big the big dogs of each of these armies,
Mm-hmm.
to me, finally feel like, and Gazgul felt like it. He was a beast in previous, but looking at somebody like Gilliman or the Gazgul, for example, with this one, epic heroes to me feel like a must-have, and they look good and they perform like they're supposed to.
I agree. I think that you can really build an army now that just looks fun. And going back to what you said, just putting something on the board because you like the model.
Yeah.
I still think you can do. I still think if you tweak your list a little bit, 10th is going to give you a lot more room to play with that. You just got to put it with the right unit, like you were saying before.
Yeah, there's still freedom to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and I put out the Morkanaut, and because I like the model, and it really should have been uh, blown up, sooner probably if I did get lucky, but it was a cool model to have out there, and it's now a towering unit along with if you're playing against another towering unit, Morkanaut saves are not the best, so just
Mm,
be wary of what you're putting out there, and finally just get more reps in, and it'll
yeah,
come eventually.
agreed.
Well, that is a ton of 40K news, Leviathan news. Man, it's just been all 40K, and will continue to be for a little while. But let's wrap up with our final little bit here. They've announced on the Warcom site about an upcoming preview that's going to be everything not 40K, which I thought
I thought it was great.
was,
Pretty
which is,
funny.
well, the little sticker on it it's got the Primaris Lieutenant, not allowed, right? It's got the little
Oh,
X through it. I,
yeah.
I thought that was great. They've been really, really heavy with the 40K news, and rightfully so. It's a new edition. It's a big
Mm-hmm.
deal. But there's some cool stuff coming out with other games. They have other games besides 40K,
That's true.
and so Steve, they've talked that they're going to show off stuff about Age of Sigmar, Horus Heresy, Underworld's Warcry, and the Old
Mm-hmm.
World. I think Sigmar is in a good place. I haven't played in a while, but that
Okay.
doesn't mean that that I don't want to or anything. I
Mm-hmm.
think Sigmar's in a good place. I don't think they need a new edition, and no one's really clamoring for that, in my opinion. But one thing I'd love to see, and when people ask which is should you go 40K, should you go Age of Sigmar, and
Mm-hmm.
I always say that Age of Sigmar is the better game. Now, 10th edition will maybe change that a little bit, but Age of Sigmar is the better game. 40K has the better lore.
Okay.
And I would
I
love
get.
to see Sigmar to have a central hero villain, very similar to just, and I know that there is no good guys in Warhammer, but
Yeah.
I like having a central figure around, like Vashtor. They had the Lionel Johnson stuff,
Mm-hmm.
the Abaddon, Arcs of Omen. That's something I can kind of sink my teeth into, and I haven't seen that for Age of Sigmar, but I would love to see something narratively for them to come out, or kind of the entire community to rally around, and a cool model and a book to go along with it. I don't know, Steve. Would that get you more interested, or with their Slaves to Darkness army that you're building? I think they had that
Oh,
with Bellacore a little bit, I thought.
absolutely. And, not to like just pump Warhammer Plus or anything like that, but I do like it. I actually enjoy the
Yeah,
subscription,
same.
but Black Talon is, I've watched every one of them. I've actually watched all 6 of them twice now.
I still
just
got to
because
catch up. I don't think I got to episode 2 or 3.
I found it incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I liked what I
There's
saw.
so much I don't know, but oh man, I don't know how that's like falling in with the current lore or anything like that with the whole
Mm-hmm.
game, but it felt like they were setting the stage for something big to come. As you get through the episodes, you may be able to comment, and we could talk about that later because you know more a little bit more about the whole lore of AOS than I do for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it kind of feels like if it's in the current setting of the game, it kind of feels like there's a build up to something big happening, which I think is very cool.
I would like to see that, and I think it would. Even though the lore is not bad for Age of Sigmar, I just think they need you just in movies and video games,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. You need a central bad guy. You know, we're playing. I'm playing in a D&D campaign right now, and we're doing Curse of Strahd. So Strahd's clearly the bad guy. He's the central
Okay.
figure, and it's just easier to attach yourself to. Oh, okay, I got to go that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even if it takes you forever to get there, you've got it from a story perspective. You can craft your game around that too.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing I'm excited about too is the old world. And I never played Warhammer
Mm.
Fantasy, the original, outside of a demo in the Games Workshop store, like, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the nostalgia, I think, of an old game coming back is something that's interesting. Steve, is this something that would you get into this at all? Square bases and all that stuff.
I could see it. It feels like I'm maybe more historical in a way,
Mm-hmm.
but not. I mean, I know it's fantasy. It seems like it's going to function as like large, epic kind of units. Perhaps I haven't put a
Yeah.
lot of look into it or thought into it. Oh
Well,
my gosh,
it's a different way to play because you're
yeah.
gonna have the trays.
Mm-hmm.
Because back in the day, you didn't have. I mean, it was much more like box trays where you put your armies and your
Mm-hmm.
squads in there. Just played a little differently, and it was much more nuanced, I thought. And you had to position angles with your shots and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I think they've simplified the game, miles from what they did in the original. But I think most people that have been in the game for a long time miss the old world
Okay.
setting and models. So I think it's a good idea to come back to some of the players that have been around for a while and maybe fix the game mechanics so that it's more modern. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad play whatsoever.
The other ones that are the Horus Heresy, which I guess is, it's not fantasy per se.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not as big into. I think when I look at the two games, I'm still more towards just 40K. If I'm going to pick one, and I can't play them all, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Warhammer Underworlds, I don't really have much
Nah.
attachment to, and then of course Warcry is a game I still have yet to play, but I'm always thinking, man, that the models and the terrain look so
Mm.
awesome.
And Lawson and then his girlfriend were talking about how easy of a game it really, really is,
Yeah,
and it definitely need to put some reps in that one. I think that would be a lot of fun. Get a lot of games in. My buddy Steve is playing the Horus Heresy stuff, and he really likes it because he's a big Horus Heresy fan in
yeah,
general. But
yeah.
he played some of the old editions, which this game is kind of based on. So for his nostalgic sake, that's the interest there. It actually sounds pretty cool. Just Marines on Marines. There's no there's no real factions. It's just traitor or not traitor, and it sounds pretty cool. Seems pretty cool actually.
That sounds more in the Dadhammer realm. Like back in my day,
Back in my
when
day,
when
exactly.
there was no complexity, and you could leave your front door open, and you could
And
lob
they
granades. Yeah,
and they
I
gave us
mean,
plastic sticks you could hit your friend with.
and we liked it,
Yeah.
and we were grateful. You know, I've never gotten into the Horus Heresy. But the book line, the lore, the narrative around that was always really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about in previous podcasts, I'm not a big reader, but I've gotten through several books. Cool to see that
Mm-hmm.
they have other games, that they're talking about something that's not 40K,
I
which
agree.
it is a good thing. It's too much of a good thing is not a good thing anymore.
That's right. Too much bacon.
Never too much bacon. Well, that will wrap our show for Bolters and Booze. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Medicae Steve. I hope you enjoyed your Shadow in the Warp, and that I am done with my Music City Light and on my clean freighter after a shower. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and attention and your service, Steve. I am the Warboss, and we will see you next time on Dadhammer. Cheers, Steve.
Cheers, David.